Hey Happy Champers, Marnie from Bubble and Flute here. Today I'm going to talk to you about how to store champagne properly. And I was actually asked this by a friend quite recently, and it reminded me of a story involving another friend who I was chatting to at a tasting that I did about a few months ago. And she was like, hey Marns, how should I store my champagne? She goes, oh, because my hubby bought me this champagne last Christmas and I kind of think it's a nice champagne and I kind of think I probably should be storing it and I'm not quite sure. And I'm like, okay. Being me, first thing I wanted to know, what was the champagne, if it's kind of nice. And she's like, oh, it's that one that starts with B that we're tasting today. And I went, oh, Bollinger? Yeah, that's it. She goes, but it's a special kind. And I went, oh, is it Le Grand Denis? No, that doesn't sound right. It's got like some initials after it, some letters after it. I went, oh, could they be RD? She goes, yeah, that's the one, the RD. And I'm like, okay, so when did he buy you this? Oh, last Christmas. I'm like, God, I really wish you'd asked me this question last Christmas. What did you do with it? She's like, oh, I put it on top of the kitchen cupboards. Okay, hate to break it to you, Lou, but your RD's trashed. So that has inspired me to share this story with you about how to properly store champagne. So there are two key enemies to champagne, and they are light and temperature, or more specifically changes in temperature. Now, all wines are sensitive to light and temperature, but champagne's a bit of a princess and it is extra sensitive, particularly to light. Now, you'll probably have noticed that most champagne bottles, and most wine bottles for that matter, are green, and that's because it's part of protecting against light. So the green bottles protect against about 92% of UV light. Now, if you're a champagne fan, you will have come across champagnes for sure that come in a clear bottle. Most notably is the Cristal champagne, the Cuvée de Prestige from the House of Louis Roederer, but I can think of a few others as well. Now, Roederer can get away with it because there's a whole raft of history behind it. They initially made the Cuvée de Prestige for the Russians who really wanted it to be made in crystal, and it was actually originally made of 100% crystal. Now the bottles are just made from glass now, but they've kept the clear glass, paying homage to that history. Most importantly, they do wrap it in a gold foil and they put it in a box. So if you are buying a champagne that is either in a restaurant or a bar or from a bottle shop that comes in a clear bottle, it must be in its box or wrapped in foil. Forget it. It must be in its box, and you must see it in its box to know that the champagne is not going to be dead. So only ever buy champagne in the clear bottle if you can see that it is been stored in a box. So light struck champagne, which is champagne that's been affected by light and damaged by light, according to Tyson Stelzer, gets an oniony, rubbery or bacon-like odor about it. Sounds attractive. So it sounds like you'll be able to pick it pretty easily. Now the thing is, once you have your champagne and you know to keep it away from light, if you're in Australia, you also need to manage the temperature it's kept at, because the other biggest enemy of champagne is temperature, or more specifically changes in temperature. So the ideal temperature for storing champagne is between 7 and 10 degrees. But the most important thing is that it's kept at a consistent temperature. So if you buy a bottle of champagne and you pop it in the fridge, you keep it in the fridge until you drink it. If you put it in the cellar or in your wine fridge, leave it there until you're ready to drink it. So now a lot of experts actually say champagne shouldn't be kept in the fridge for longer than 3 to 4 days, because they can start to detect oxidation. Now I think the average champagne drinker, that isn't going to be an issue for you, and I've kept bottles of champagne in the fridge for 6 months and really don't notice that much of a difference. But the thing about putting them in the fridge versus a wine fridge is the lack of humidity. And in the lack of humidity, what happens is the cork dries out, and when the cork dries out, it doesn't seal properly, and that's when you get the oxygen, the champagne being exposed to oxygen, and you get something called oxidization, which is really the death of champagne. So oxidization is one of two main issues where champagne is damaged, and it's probably the most common. And the champagne will come across, I think, as just being a bit flat and a bit old and a bit lackluster. So the problem is with oxidization, it can actually happen at any way along the stage. And I think Tyson Stelzer says about 6.5% of champagnes that he tastes, he can detect are oxidized. So it can happen before degorgement. hasn't even been corked in the cellars yet. It can happen during shipping. It can happen at the retailer, or it can happen once you get your hot little hands on it and stuff the process up as well. So it can be something that you can't necessarily control. And it really comes down to, I guess, particularly the freshness. So one of the ways that we're getting around this issue now, there's a couple of different ways they're getting around the issue with oxidization, but one of them is more and more growers and houses are printing the degorgement date on the back of the label. So by putting the degorgement date on the back of the label, and I'm just going to show you a picture of what that would look like here. You can see the date is written there in this bottle of Veuve Clicquot. What that does is that tells you the date that the champagne was degorged. So you'll get an idea when you buy it, or when you come across it in the restaurant, or you pick it out of somebody's cellar, you'll get an idea of how fresh the champagne is as well. So particularly with non-vintage champagnes, they suggest you wouldn't hold on to them any longer than 3 years. Non-vintage champagnes are meant to be bought and drunk. They're not meant to be cellared and stored, because they're really not going to mature or change any. But they're keeping the degorgement dates, starting to print the degorgement dates on the bottles so that people have got a better idea of how fresh the champagne is. If you don't know how to read the label, then maybe just ask somebody if you're going to a specialty wine shop, or even the retailer that you're buying from, to see if they can give you any help. And that would, you can sometimes find that you'll get a batch of non-vintages and you might have 2 years, 18 months difference in the degorgement dates on the back. So of course you're always going to buy the fresher one. That's what I would do anyway. So that's one way that you can protect yourself before you buy it. But it is a little bit hard to know, and some of the codes that they use are a little bit complex, but they usually use the year, and then it may be a letter or a number, and it may be the month, or it may be a letter for A for January, B for February, or it may be a quarter. Different houses have different techniques, but at least if you can see the year, you're starting to get a sense of it. So the other main issue that happens with champagne to spoil it is corking or cork taint. And when you get a cork tainted champagne, you get this smell of wet cardboard or wet dog, because in effect what's happened is that the cork's got a bit moldy and there's bacteria in the champagne. So it can smell like that, or it can smell a bit flat and lackluster. So a lot more champagnes now, I think according to Tyson Stealth, it's about 1 in 6 bottles of champagne is now sealed under DIAM, D-I-A-M, which is a kind of which is specifically designed to extract the cork taint and other molecules from the champagne that can harm the wine. So that's becoming more common. It's not compulsory yet, so until it is, cork taint's going to remain a bit of a problem as well, but not a huge problem. It's not something that I encounter a great deal of anyway. So to sum up, tips for buying champagne that is least likely to be damaged is check the label for the degorgement date, or ask somebody in the shop, find out if it's sealed under DIAM, and then you're protecting yourself as much as you can against cork and against oxidization. So once you get the champs into your hot little hand, particularly here in Australia, away from light, and store at a consistent temperature. So put it in the fridge if you're going to drink it pretty much straight away, or put it in your cellar or your wine fridge if you're storing it for a later date. Don't keep it in the fridge for too long. And if you do keep it in the fridge for a few days or weeks or months, I'd suggest lying it on the side, and so the cork's less likely to dry out that way. But most of all, it needs to be kept at a consistent temperature. Do not leave it on top of the cupboard. Do not leave it on the bench. Do not put it in the pantry. Don't put it on one of those half-assed wine racks that sits in the kitchen, because hot, cold, humidity, wet, dry, all over the place in any Queensland house particularly, and it will kill the champagne. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of an idea. Really, really simple, consistent temperature, keep it away from light. If you do drink a lot of wine, invest in a wine fridge. Look, they look like they cost a little bit of money. Let me recommend a particular brand, which is an Australian brand. You can only get it from Melbourne, called Kitchener. So they don't sell retail, they only sell direct to consumer, so it cuts out the markup. There is a bit of a cost of shipping, but they are incredibly high quality, and they're incredibly good prices for what they do as well. Otherwise, drop into Harvey Norman. There you get a Vintec or a Eurocave, and if you are keeping champagne for any length of time, it's definitely worth the investment, because when you're spending hundreds of dollars on a bottle of champagne, you do not want to drink it dead. All right, hope that helps. Lou, sorry hun, we should watch this a year ago. Craigie, who asked for more information about it, I hope you enjoyed the video, and ciao for now.